The moon rose bright and full, and brought with it a strange wind that blew through town. It blew down the streets, kicking up dust, and caused the gutter on the Bellison's roof to come loose and start to swing back and forth, banging against the side of the house. The noise awoke the middle-aged couple living there, causing the wife to tell her husband, "Get out there and do something about that damn thing." Against his better judgment, Mr. Bellison set up a tall ladder and attempted to follow his wife's orders. But the wind blew hard against him, the ladder slipped to the side, and he fell 20 feet, impaling himself below on a wrought iron fence, where he died instantly from a metal spike through his head. Mrs. Bellison ran outside, took one look at the bloody mess, and smiled. "Thank goodness," she whispered to herself. "I'll use his life insurance money and take that cruise to Barbados I've always wanted." Then she called her friend Susan and explained, "Good news! We're going on a vacation." She paused, listened to her friend, and then laughed. "No, I didn't kill him. Lord knows I wanted to hundreds of times. It's amazing. The wind blew the ladder over, almost like it knew what I'd been thinking." A few blocks over, the wind blew into the neighborhood just off Main Street and crept with nimble fingers into Jenny Swenson's bedroom. The 12-year-old woke to a cold wind swirling around her head, waking her up. An idea formed. Tomorrow was her mother's birthday, and Jenny had a surprise for her. Maybe now would be a good time to give it to her. She reached under her bed and took out the painting of her mom she'd been working on for the last month. Her mother was overweight, but had a pretty face, and Jenny had painted her portrait, emphasizing her mother's auburn hair and amber eyes, her best features. She smiled as she looked at the painting one more time. Her mom really was beautiful. She'd love it. Jenny snuck into her mother's room and turned on the light. "Surprise!" she shouted, but her mother didn't respond. She just lay quiet and unmoving. Jenny ran to her side and felt for a pulse. There was none. Her mother was dead. She burst into tears as an icy cold wind blew open the curtains. The room was suddenly freezing. Jenny called the police, then she closed the window, and she cried as she held the portrait of her mother tight, waiting for help to arrive, shivering like she never had before. The wind blew into Sally Jensen's window as she lay in bed reading one of her treasured romance novels. A librarian at the Fox Hollow Library, she was 57 years old and had been a shy single woman her entire life. But on that night, as the wind puffed through her lacy curtains, she got to thinking, maybe I should live a little. She drove downtown to the Red Fox Bar, where she was pleasantly surprised to find it was ladies' night. She ordered a daiquiri, then another. There was a group of women at the back table she recognized from the library who were having an animated, good-natured discussion. To Sally's surprise and joy, one of them came over and invited her to join them, which she readily did, and she had a wonderful time. Later that night, the wind began blowing hard, howling like a deranged spirit as Sally walked across the parking lot to her car. She shivered, teeth chattering. The next day, she didn't show up for work, and a call was made to her home. She didn't answer. The police were sent to investigate, but they found no clue as to her whereabouts. No one knew where she was. She was never heard from again. The wind blew in through Eddie Young's window as the old man sat by lamplight in his tiny living room, drinking whiskey and thinking about his departed bitch of a wife, Harriet. Life was so much better with her gone. A stray breeze ruffled the pages of the newspaper in his lap, startling him out of his reverie. As if possessed, he stood up and went outside to his backyard garden. He stared into the night sky, resplendent with the stars of the Milky Way, and he was overcome with a sense of wildness brought on by the majestic beauty of it all. Suddenly, he couldn't help himself. The wind wafted through his thinning hair. As he stared and started howling at the luminescent moon high in the sky. The longer he howled, the better he felt, even better than that night earlier in the year when he'd swung for the fences and crushed Harriet's head with a baseball bat, caving in her skull. Then he'd buried her in the garden. He continued howling until a neighbor leaned out of his window and yelled, "Shut up, or I'll call the cops." Eddie stopped and eyeballed the man. Then he eyeballed his garden. Yeah, there was enough room. The wind began to blow hard as he went inside and got his baseball bat. It was time to teach that jerk a lesson. That night, Johnny Smith drove Laurie Jones in his pickup truck to a secluded spot on the lake at the outskirts of town. As the wind blew through the windows of his truck, they began kissing passionately until things got a little out of control. Johnny wanted to have sex, but Laurie didn't. He was adamant and lunged at her. "No!" she yelled, pushing him away. He came at her one more time, and that was it. She squirted him in the face with pepper spray, opened the door, tumbled out into the reeds, and ran into the woods to hide. Nearly blinded, Johnny stumbled around looking for her, screaming not only in pain, but also what would he do if he found her. She stayed hidden until eventually he got in his truck and drove off in a huff. Later that day, she heard he was dead. The authorities ruled that the night a strong wind had blown him off the road in his pickup truck. He had crashed into a tree. He'd been thrown through the windshield, and the cops at the scene said they'd never seen so much blood. Laurie could say with certainty that she wasn't sad or sorry at all. That night, the wind came up and blew through town, changing the lives of all that it met. Toward dawn, it swirled back out of the homes and the yards and down the streets and alleyways and headed back to where it had come from, the Fox Hollow Cemetery. There it swirled among the tombstones, finding a home among the dead, until such a time when it would arise again and swirl up out of the graves, and then blow down the streets, bringing its own brand of horror to the citizens of Fox Hollow.